All right, let's continue with our quest of making our controllers more leaner. In the last lecture, what we did is we moved our core data stack initialization code into a completely separate file and a class called core data manager, whose responsibility was to initialize core data manager and give us the manage object context. In this uh, lecture, what we're going to do is we are going to look at NSFetchResults controller and means of fetching data from our SQLite database using core data. So we were going to look at how we can make it much better and remove all this fetching portion of it, like the request portion and all of that stuff, into somewhere else, namely providers. So we're going to add a new file, and I'm just going to add a new Swift file, and I'm going to call them data providers. But in this case, I'm going to call them shopping list data provider. Now the data provider, or the whole point of having a data provider is to fetch the data. That's it. So import core data. And the reason, of course, that we are doing this is that so we can move all the code that we wrote for using our NSFetchResults controller delegate, NSFetchResults controller. So all of this, which is being done in the shopping list table view controller, we can perhaps move all of this code into a separate class shopping list data provider. Because if we have to use this code again, let's say in a different screen, we want to favorite our favorite shopping list, I have to type this code again in the view controller, maybe a shopping list favorite table view controller. So instead of doing that, if we can move this into shopping list data provider, then it will mean that I just have to use the code which is already inside the shopping list data provider. So just going to call it shopping list data provider. Okay, so the shopping list data provider is responsible for giving you or the shopping list basically. All right, so we have to be a little bit careful how we implement this part. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is it's going to take a manage object context. So manage object context, which will be ns manage object context. Okay, and once you initialize it, it's automatically going to start fetching the information. That means that we will create a request. So let request equals to ns fetch request, and our request will be for entity name, which in this case is shopping list, right? So all the code that we wrote in the shopping list table view controller, we are going to be using it over here. Okay. Now the other thing we can do is we have to have sort descriptors. So how, when the data comes back, how do you want it to be sorted? So ns sort descriptor, and let's see if it helps us over here. Key, I believe the only property we have is the title in ascending order. Yes, so let's do that true. Okay. Now after we have done that, we need the fetch results controller to perform this request. Just like we were doing it over here, we have to initialize the fetch results controller, okay, and set the delegate and all that stuff. So that means the first thing we have to do is to use a delegate, which is ns fetch results controller delegate. All right. Now, obviously, this is a problem because our class shopping list data provider does not inherit from any class. It just inherits from a protocol. So this cannot happen. So let's go ahead and say that, okay, we inherit from NS object. Let's go ahead and build this. and now it's okay. So once we have the NS fetch results controller delegate, we can also initialize the fetch results controller, which is NS fetch results controller. Let's go ahead and build this. Of course, it is a generic argument in iOS 10, so I can say of type shopping list. All right. So now I can go ahead and say fetch results controller and initialize it, fetch results controller and fetch request. So in this case, I already have the request, I can pass in the request. The manage object context will be passed to the shopping list data provider through the initialization. So I can simply say manage object context, whatever you're passing. I'm just going to use that. Section key path, I'm just going to pass nil and nil because we're not really using that right now. And finally, I can perform the fetch request. So fetch request perform, basically with a try like this. And this is all the code that we have already typed in our shopping list table view controller. We're just moving it into a separate place. Now, when the fetch results is performed or the perform fetch is done, since we do have to set one more thing, the delegate, fetch results controller.delegate equals to self. This means that our shopping list data provider is going to get all the delegate methods, all the events that are related to the fetch results controller delegate. Let's see what's going on. So self use before super.init call. So let's go ahead and say super.init. Okay. All right. So now this one, which is the NS fetch results controller delegate, of course, this protocol comes with a lot of delegate methods, and we can already see that in our shopping list table view controller. The delegate method that we were implementing was the did change delegate method of the NS fetch results controller. So let's go back. Let's see if we can do that. Did change. So fetch results controller did change. Well, did change this one. There we go. So anytime anything returns or gets deleted or added or updated, the NS fetch results controller did change delegate method is going to get fired. Okay, and we can do some other stuff over here later on. So let's go back to our shopping list table view controller. Since we are moving all this code, and we have actually, so we don't need the NS fetch results controller delegate because we just created a shopping list data provider, so we'll be using that. So let's go ahead and remove that guy over here. Fetch results controller, we don't need that because that is now become the part of shopping list data provider. So let's remove that. If we have removed that, then we don't really need to do any of this stuff because this is now once again being done in the shopping list data provider. So let's remove all of the fetching code. Since we have removed the NS fetch results controller delegate, this is one of those delegate methods. So let's go ahead and remove that. Of course, we'll run into some issues. And one of the issue is when fetching the object. Let's say fetch results controller was being used to locate the object at a particular index. But now we cannot do that, right? Since we don't have the fetch results controller. So we have to replace our fetch results controller with an object of type shopping list data provider. So let's go ahead and create a shopping list data provider. I'm going to say shopping list data provider, shopping list data provider. And now I can go ahead and initialize maybe the shopping list data provider over here, self.shopping list data provider, shopping list data provider, and the only thing it asks for is the manage object context. Luckily, we already have that, so I'm just going to pass that object. But still we have an issue because we're using fetch results controller, and I already deleted that property over here. So somehow we have to use the shopping list provider over here. So I can simply say over here, shopping list provider dot object at index, and pass in the index. Now obviously this is going to complain because the shopping list provider is our own custom class, which does not contain any function called object at index. Well, that's not a big deal because we can go ahead and implement it. So let's go over here and implement the function object at index. We are going to take an index path, so I guess that is at index path ns index path, and it is going to return us some sort of an object, most probably a shopping list, right? Let's go back and see if this now even compiles or not. Still kind of failed for some reason. Let's see. Dot shopping list. Oh, maybe I have misspelled it. Shopping list data provider dot object at index, and index path we are sending is index path. Let's remove this line of code. Right, let's go to object at index, which is part of this. Of course, we have to return something called shopping list, and at this point we can take, or we can use the fetch results controller object at index method and pass in the index path, and it will return us the correct one. Let's go ahead and build that. I guess we have to pass in the index path and not the other way around. Let's go back over here. Let's see where this is giving us problem. Okay, so once again, now we're having problem with the fetch results controller. Now the sections is having a problem. So we'll fix that later. We can easily fix this one. We can simply say shopping list data provider dot object at index path, and we can simply pass in the index path over here. So that should be okay. So the only thing that is wrong over here is this guy over here, the fetch results controller. Okay, and I'm going to show you how we can easily fix that in the next lecture. All right, so stay tuned, but we are actually on a very good path of creating a very nice lean controller. All right, so stay tuned for more.